So yeah, let's do a show before we have to evac because the mob gets too big and pushes through the gates. And
good idea. All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, October 4th, 2015. Holy crap, it's October already. And this is episode 134 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, Jerry, how are you, sir?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. On Friday, I played hooky and went and did some photography at an air show, so that was fun.
Hey, that's pretty cool.
It was a crappy weather day, but that actually resulted in some neat photos.
I bet. Good.
So that was good, and now we're here.
Good deal. Yeah, I've been spending lots of time on planes too.
Yeah. Well, I feel for you.
So just a reminder, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer. So, by the way, just kind of a last-minute final recap at DerbyCon. The all of the conference talks are posted now. So, if you're interested, you can watch hundreds of hours of talks.
Now I have to find the time to actually do that. I always want to, but it's not finding the time.
I agree.
To actually sit down and watch the talks. It seems like a great idea. I'm like, I'll catch them on video later, and then I never find the opportunity. Maybe I can convince my boss to let me do it at work.
It seems work related.
It's definitely work related.
So anyhow, we have at least I have a personal commitment, so I'm going to kind of scoot along. So we'll jump into
his subtle way of, Andy, shut up, stop making jokes, and let's get to our stories.
Yeah, more or less.
All right then.
It's good that you can read between the lines. So anyhow, by the way, kind of in relation to this first story, I do want to take a minute and just express to our listeners and remind everyone that the privacy of the data of our listeners is of paramount importance to the personalities, producers, stagehands, lawyers, HR. I mean, the cast of thousands that put on the Defensive Security Podcast all deeply regret the unfortunate activities of this past week.
It's true. It's true. In fact, we take this so seriously, we actually fired 2 guys last week for leaving just somebody's name on a piece of paper in a visible spot.
That's true. That is true.
We don't play. We do not play.
Clean desk policy is very, very tightly enforced here at the Defensive Security Studios. And, I don't know what to say. So that takes us into our first story, which comes from Ars Technica. And the title is Patreon was warned of serious website flaw 5 days before it was hacked. So this is a follow-on story to the main story, which was that Patreon, who, as I mentioned, is the organization that handles donations for many nonprofits and musicians and artists and things like that. Anyhow, their database was
including us.
Yes, including us,
which we love our donors. Thank you.
Yes, and by the way, I do want to just express gratitude because even since this, we've gotten a few new donations. So I want to express deep thanks to everyone who has donated and continues to donate.
It's tough because we swing from being snarky and sarcastic to incredibly sincere when we say that. So I know that we may sometimes sound like we're being snarky, but we really...
that was sincere.
It was.
Everything we're about to say now is snarky. So there you go. So anyhow, here's the deal. That Patreon apparently has as many organizations do, a development version of their website. And apparently this development version of their website had their live data, had a copy of their live data, and used this WorkZoog utility library, which allows developers to do some, I guess aggressive debugging, as I'll term it, and in the process, it will allow a developer the ability to execute code, right? So you can tell the system, the web server, to execute arbitrary code, and it appears, I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but it appears that what happened here is that this some attacker leveraged that utility, very likely uploaded a web shell, and then copied off the contents of the server, which included apparently all the source code and the database, which totaled 13.7 gigabytes, and then subsequently posted it online. So that included things like names, I guess addresses, although that's not very clear to me, email addresses for sure, encrypted passwords, although their passwords apparently are decrypted, and I know you want to talk about that. But apparently no payment information was exposed, so not entirely sure what was different about the payment handling, but there you have it. So I don't think credit monitoring has actually been offered yet.
Well, I've got it from 30 other organizations, so.
That's true.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this week on the show it's a breach-a-palooza. We've got 4 different breaches to talk about. But it's interesting comparing and contrasting. And Patreon did a very good job of coming out and releasing a lot of technical details. Lots of comments come to mind about this. And first of all, the original story is certainly bad, and we'll talk about that. But the follow-on story, which is, they were warned of this serious web flaw by, what was the name of it? Detectify, a Swedish security firm, that they had picked up that Patreon was running this live web app using, basically the Shodan search service. Oh, by the way, there's thousands of other websites that also have this exposed. And they warned Patreon. And so kind of the implication behind this story coming from ours is, why didn't Patreon fix it when they were warned about it? And, my first comment on that is there's a whole lot that goes into why companies do things. And it's not as simple as just flipping a switch. So having been on the other side of this many, many times, I get a lot of solicitations almost daily of, oh my God, dude, your stuff is so unprotected. You are so vulnerable if you don't buy my crap. And it's tough to know what is a legitimate inbound security report and a sales guy being a sales guy.
That's a fair point.
And shoveling FUD. So I'm not trying to apologize for Patreon, but I'm saying that depending on how this notification came in, we don't know how it got sent to Patreon. We don't even know if it got to the right people, if it was reviewed. It could be that they knew about it. They're like, wow, yeah, that's something we need to deal with. Okay, let's get a plan together. We don't know what their change control is like. We don't know what their planning process is like. There's a lot, you can't just necessarily turn on a dime in a complex environment. Certainly once a breach happens, it's really easy to point back and go, wow, they were idiots. But when you're in a run rate and nothing has happened yet, you're like, well, yeah, this is bad. But in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, but nothing's happened yet, so we'll get to it. But it's not. It's so much easier to have 20/20 hindsight when you look at these situations and go, wow, were they idiots? They should have shut that down. But if it's been up and running like that for 3 or 4 years, and suddenly this happens, and then 5 days later it gets popped, it's very conceivable for me to see an organization not reacting in the time frame that they had.
Yeah, there's a nuance in here that may partially explain their either lack of reaction or slow reaction, and that apparently is that this tool, the WorkZoog utility library, is apparently well known. I mean, I guess the group that writes it is pretty careful to caution you about what can happen with this thing, and it's entirely possible that because this thing normally requires some kind of an authenticated, some authentication challenge before you can interact with it. Again, I don't know this to be fact, right? But Patreon might have said, well, this is something we'll deal with. But apparently, what maybe they weren't aware of is that if an attacker or somebody, somebody else, is able to trigger, a failure, a fault in the web app and in other parts of the web app, it will actually trigger this utility to kick in without the need for authentication. And so I'm just wondering if there was some consideration that, that thing is authenticated, we don't have to worry about that. We'll fix it later. I don't know again.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. The other thing I thought was interesting is they released a lot of info about their environment. They said that most of the user information was encrypted with a 2048 RSA key, which is good and strong, assuming they implement it properly. They also got into how the passwords were protected, and they said that they, quote, "We protect our user passwords with a hashing scheme called bcrypt and randomly salt each individual password. Bcrypt is non-reversible, so passwords cannot be, quote unquote, decrypted. We do not store plain text passwords anywhere." Okay, a couple things on that. First of all, I appreciate that level of detail. It shows that they're thinking. They understand the difference between encryption and hashing, and they're also randomly salting each individual password, which is really important. Now, the fact that they are saying it's not reversible, that's true. It's a non-reversible encryption, but is not free of brute forcing. You could potentially brute force. So, but the upside of this is, and what I think is important here, is that it shows that a certain level of breach resiliency in their design. And I think this is something that we as an industry need to get closer to, which is saying, okay, let's assume we're going to get breached. Let's assume somebody's going to get a hold of our database information. What can we do, assuming that a bad guy had access to this, to make their life more difficult? And I think that's an important kind of takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we have to temper our enthusiasm a little bit because, Ashley Madison also used bcrypt, and one of the downsides, one of the things that can happen when you have a full take of the environment is, I think in Ashley Madison's case, it was discovered that they badly implemented bcrypt, and subsequently were able to reverse or brute force about 11 or 12 million.
That's a great
passwords.
point. Yeah, and the point that I think you're making that I think is important is how you implement this stuff is incredibly key.
Yeah, and the other, I think the other is, and we'll talk about this in an upcoming story. It's great that they did encrypt, use some pretty strong, robust encryption for the more sensitive data. However, if their code also has a way to decrypt that, i.e., just because the data is stored in a database in an encrypted state, the code has the ability to unencrypt that. And now, if I am able to copy your code, I can decrypt that. I didn't really buy much in this particular case. It helps in like an SQLI type of attack, but doesn't help in this kind of an attack. So you got to really think. And by the way, I have no idea if that was the case in this situation or not. I suspect somebody at some point will figure that out. But it is something you really need to think about how game this out, right?
Well, the other two takeaways I had is why would anyone have test servers open to the internet? You need to have a really, really good reason to do that. So that's a good takeaway. Make sure none of your test servers are open to the internet, guys.
Yeah, but agile, DevOps, come on.
Your mom is agile. Oh. And second, why are they using prod data in test? Why not have fake data?
Agile, DevOps. Yeah.
Breach, hack.
Agile.
Any other breach, hack? Any other buzzword?
Agile. Did I say agile?
But the takeaway for me is, once again, just think for 5 seconds. What if this site got hacked?
Yep.
And, that will inform so many decisions. But it's tough for folks to think that way. I get that. But it's kind of the way we need to.
Yeah.
All right. I beat that one to the ground.
All right. So let's move on to the next story. This one comes from Krebs Security, and it is also a breach. Scottrade breach hits 4.6 million customers is the title. There's a disturbing lack of any kind of detail in here, except that apparently the intrusion was in a period between late 2013 and 2014, early 2014, and they just became aware of this, I believe, back in August, and did their own investigation and found that yes, apparently indeed, someone had accessed contact information apparently of their 4.6 million of their customers, apparently not accessing any of the trading information or able to commit any fraud. The hypothesis offered in this and some of the other articles I read is that potentially this was done to target spam, to do pump penny stocks, something like that. There is something in here that's a little concerning. Again, the FBI notified Scottrade over a year after apparently it ended. So don't understand how that came to be. But also that they apparently aren't the only ones, right? So second paragraph, in an email sent today to customers, St. Louis-based Scottrade said it recently heard from the federal law enforcement officials about crimes involving the theft of information from Scottrade and other financial services companies. So far, we've not really heard about any other financial services companies, so I'm guessing there are more shoes to drop. So, stay tuned.
Yeah. You hit on most of the main points. It's interesting that they didn't detect themselves. They were notified by law enforcement, the FBI. Makes you wonder what it is they're missing. And again, they said, hey, our passwords are fully encrypted, but that's all they said. What does that mean? Were they hashed? Were they encrypted? How were they set up? Again, just being encrypted isn't good enough. We already kind of talked about that.
That's right. All right, so moving on to our next breach of the day. This one comes from Wired. Hack brief. Hackers steal 15 million T-Mobile customers data from Experian.
And wow, is the T-Mobile CEO upset?
Yeah, he is. He's fit to be tied. It is.
He's been a firebrand for a while now. He's kind of a non-conventional CEO. He's very sort of, I don't know, kind of vocal and interesting character.
Yeah. So the deal here is that Experian processes, I guess, credit checks for people who are financing their T-Mobile phones. I think it's just here in the U.S. And 15 million of these people over a period of time had their information was amongst the pot of names, addresses, birth dates, and encrypted Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, passport numbers, and so on were stolen. Now, it's interesting that they also go on to say that that encrypted data may have been decrypted by the attacker. And this kind of sounds a lot like the Axelis breach that we talked about, I think, 2 weeks ago, where the data was in fact encrypted, and just like we talked about with Patreon, depending on how you implement that encryption, it may actually not do that much for you in how the breach plays out. And so,
this is the problem with just encrypt everything. Well, okay, you really got to think that through.
Right. And so that's, going back to OPM, OPM took a lot of hell for not having their data encrypted, but depending on how that happened, the data may not have been encrypted relative to the person who was stealing it.
Or relative, yeah, because of the angle of exploit and compromise, whatever they may be coming in, what channel they may be coming through, may happily decrypt it for them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't encrypt your data. It needs to be encrypted, but it's a bit more of a sophisticated and a complicated conversation to just say, oh, it's encrypted or not encrypted. How you encrypt it matters, but certainly encrypt it.
Right. Yeah, and for instance, if your DBAs or whatnot have the ability to decrypt it with their credentials, through some kind of transparent database encryption software, and it's their credentials that get compromised and provide access to the database. Well, that encryption didn't buy you much. And by the way, that's how a lot of these attacks are being perpetrated. And so I think the net point is, other than the T-Mobile CEO's very entertaining, I guess, for lack of a better word, response to this, is you really need to kind of game out how your protection technologies line up against the way in which things are, attacks are actually happening. And again, it's great to encrypt. However, if you're putting the encryption keys in your code and your code in the database gets stolen, you've not done anything. And if you're encrypting it, but your administrative users have the ability to transparently decrypt it, again, and they get attacked through some kind of phishing type attack, you've not bought anything. Yeah. So you really need to think about it, right?
Your server has full disk encryption. Okay.
You've protected against someone running in and stealing your hard drive.
Right. Not trying to dissuade people from encrypting, but think it through.
Right. So, of course, Experian, by the way, is offering credit monitoring provided by Experian. And so,
different vision.
I found it interesting that on Twitter, the CEO of T-Mobile said something to the effect of, we're exploring other providers of credit monitoring for you, for the customers. So. It sounds like he's T-Mobile and Experian may not have a relationship for much longer. I'm thinking that'd be my takeaway.
Yeah, I imagine so.
The other thing that struck me too is obviously we don't know exactly how this happened, but you would like to think that a company like Experian, who basically has all of the data about everybody in pretty much in the world, who has some kind of financial presence, would protect their stuff a little better. I mean, because this is probably one of the most valuable concentrations of financial information there is, and this is now the second or third time they've had a pretty high profile breach.
On the upside, I mean, the one thing I'll give them a little bit of credit for is this was confined just to T-Mobile data in Experian systems, which tells me that Experian is segregating their data for different customers, which is a very good idea. Think if it was commingled.
That's a good point. It was 15 million and not 400 million.
And a lot of companies commingle data, and they lie when they say, "Are you segregating it?" Sure, we are. Right?
It's in a whole different table.
Right. So that, I think, is a good takeaway. At least it isolated the breach to just T-Mobile's data. It could have been far larger, depending on how they got in. And we don't know a lot yet about this breach. We don't know how it happened. Do we even know how this became public? Was it a data dump? I didn't catch it in any of my reading.
I am not aware of how it came to light either.
Okay.
It may have been self-detected. I'm not sure, though.
Stay tuned. We'll find out.
Yeah. That's right.
So that's the other thing. Going back to the topic we've been hitting on, assume a box gets hacked. How do you limit the lateral movement and spread of that hacker's actions?
Yep, that's right. So moving on to our next story. This one comes from Time. And the title is Trump Hotel's credit card system has been hacked. So apparently the Trump Hotel group is not quite on board with that, but they are investigating. And I'm sure that once their investigation concludes, they will provide credit monitoring to those impacted, right?
And let's not forget, they will issue a press release that they take their customer security very seriously.
And that there was no evidence of inappropriate use.
Clearly. But out of an abundance of caution, they'll be offering a year of free credit monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. So, apparently, let's see. Some of the other stories I read was apparently this was... Oh, there it is. Officials believe hackers used malware to capture sensitive payment information within the company's computer system between at least May 19, 2014 and June 2nd, 2015, warning anyone who stayed at the above locations during that time might have been affected. And that's those locations, by the way, are New York, Chicago, Honolulu, Las Vegas, Toronto, and Miami. All really nice places to be. Just not use your credit cards at Trump, apparently. So it's hard to say. Was it a yet another RAM scraper type deal or something else? Just given the pervasiveness of the RAM scrapers, I'm going to go. The smart money's probably on that square, but let's see what I did there.
I did. I see. I saw that. That was clever.
Clever, yeah.
How's it working out for you?
I don't know.
Being clever.
Pretty good, actually.
Okay, good. Carry on, man.
Yeah. So our next story is from Fortune, and the title is American Bankers Association pushes for stronger data security.
Not to be confused with the American Bowlers Association, which is what I read when I saw ABA at first.
Well, I could definitely see how that would be confusing.
Hey, they have a hell of a marketing campaign.
That's true. So, the American Bankers Association, very interestingly, has been a staunch lobbyist against, or I should say, in favor of stricter regulations on retailers to protect their constituents, the banks, from the unwashed masses of merchants who keep getting compromised. And so apparently they themselves were compromised. Their quote, checkout tool or shopping cart tool was compromised in some manner, and 6,400 records of usernames, passwords, and it's not clear if there were credit cards in that pot were stolen. No technical details about how it happened. It's really more of an irony kind of story that a group who is throwing rocks at merchants to clean up their act gets hacked.
So I did review the data dump file that was involved with this, actually.
Okay.
And I got to be careful what I'm allowed to say here, but the dump file I saw contained usernames, which were primarily email addresses, and clear text passwords. Nothing else.
Wait, clear text passwords?
Yes.
Nice.
And some other folks on Twitter were sort of musing that this looked to be 2-year-old data.
Oh,
so
really?
Take that with a grain of salt.
Interesting.
Yeah. They were saying that when they had looked at some of this, some of the accounts were no longer valid, people had left the organization, et cetera, et cetera. That gave them the sense that this was old info.
Okay.
So don't know how long they were sitting on this info. Don't know. Anyway, just I happened to glance at it. I happened to look at it as part of something else I was working on. And
interesting.
Yeah.
All right, our last story, and I picked a different link than I sent you, but it's the same story. This one comes from SC Magazine, and the title is R.T. Jones reaches settlement with SEC in data breach case. So the deal is there's this investment company called R.T. Jones Capital Equities Management, and they had, I guess it was a couple years ago, back in 2013, July 2013, they had the personal information of 100,000 people compromised. And in the ensuing investigation, the SEC found that they did not, they being RT Jones Capital Equities Management, did not actually have a security policy. And so...
as in a written security policy?
Yes.
Or,
yes,
okay.
as in a written security policy.
But does that mean they were not actually doing any sort of security, or they just hadn't written it down?
Well, we don't actually know some of those more nitty-gritty details, but
okay.
So the SEC does levy some requirements on its covered entities, and one of those things is that they have to have a documented security policy. And in this particular case, this company did not have it, and so they received a $75,000 fine, which, by the way, is less than $1 per record. So that's quite the bargain, in my mind. I think we're way past all of the credit monitoring. The credit monitoring, I assume, is already expired by now. So I think point is that I think we're seeing, kind of like we talked about in the last case, we're seeing a more aggressive approach by regulators and industry groups trying to improve security, for lack of a better way to put it, of organizations like this through regulations and fines and things like that. And more and more organizations are falling in the scope of those things. This is not just HIPAA covered entities or people who are covered under PCI. This is really starting to develop, and I think I don't really know where the end is, but I would imagine, especially with organizations like the FTC who have very broad reaching powers, this is it's very perilous not to take this stuff seriously. Now, in this particular case, not having a documented security policy is pretty fundamentally bad, I guess. The thing that would be interesting to me is if they did have a documented security policy and it still happened, would they still have been fined? We don't know that.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, hey, we need to fine them for something. Go find something to fine them for.
Right. We got to take our pound of flesh.
Right. Set an example, et cetera, et cetera. Not to be that snarky about it, but that is how some of these regulators think.
Yeah. So, anyhow, again, not a lot of innovative or new stuff here, except that, again, the regulatory domain is becoming more prominent. So the thing that struck me as I'm reading this and thinking about the FTC and HIPAA and other regulations and regulators is that when we talk about IT security risk, we often think about the risks are associated with being hacked and losing data and the cost of credit monitoring and lawsuits and things like that. But I think less common is considering the costs associated with non-compliant or being found non-compliant by a regulator and the ensuing fine. So you don't necessarily have to have something bad happen in every case. And so I'm just kind of where one of my takeaways is that we need to start thinking from a risk perspective more about including regulatory action, both proactive and reactive, in our risk models.
Yeah, I agree. And it's definitely starting to become a bigger and bigger issue as we're seeing more and more. And more government organizations say they want to get involved in this as well. So it's going to cause us to have to consider more of those costs in our risk models. And ultimately, does that then drive decisions that make certain business lines unprofitable for certain organizations?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost certainly going to have an impact like that for some organizations. So anyway, more, as that space develops, I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. So that's actually all the stories we have for tonight. And now I get to go do my family stuff.
Enjoy. Have fun.
Thank you. Yeah, before I fly out again for another week of fun in beautiful New York.
We'll miss you.
Yeah, it's all right. So anyhow, if you like the show, give us some love on iTunes. For those of you who have, thank you very much. If you want to support the show, we are still, we're still committed to Patreon. We think, that they'll learn from their mistakes and do right by their constituents and customers. So thank you to those who have donated, and if you would like to donate, please, it's very much appreciated. You can find the show notes, links to the stories we talked about on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll call it a week and talk again next time.
Thanks. Have a great week. As always, thank you for listening. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
I just finished reading through the articles.
Yeah, that's always helpful.
It is often and rare for me, but I try. Especially that
we appreciate your.
You and the mouse in your pocket.
No. Me and our listeners.
I see. So you speak for all of our listeners now.
Every single one.
Wow.
I have paperwork. I forgot to follow back up with you, but the next...
Jesus, man. You know what? This lack of follow-up is unacceptable in this organization.
All right. Showtime. We gotta get this over with so we can see the fireworks.
Well, that's true. And it is wet here, so... I mean, I've already bribed a number of officials to ensure we can still launch the fireworks. I think what happened was, instead of clapping and wooing and whistling... that society has deemed as a show of appreciation, we need to introduce polite hat tipping very quietly.
Oh.
As
that's a good idea.
The ideal show of appreciation going forward.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.